Ah, my untraceables. The ones who don't just walk into rooms, you rearrange the air in them. The ones whose silence feels like judgment, whose stillness infects the temperature. The kind of presence that makes even the chandelier tremble. And you know what's funny? Not ha-ha funny. The kind of funny that makes enemies shift uncomfortably in their bulletproof chairs. The Mafia king thought he could measure you with spreadsheets, intel, surveillance, psychological profiles. He thought you were a number he could reduce, a face he could erase, a threat he could outsource. But the problem? He swung down like a sledgehammer, and all he found was his own reflection shattering back at him. They told him you were alone, that you were unarmed, that your movements didn't follow a pattern, that your eyes didn't blink like they were supposed to. They said you didn't speak when spoken to. You studied, and worse, you remembered. But ego is louder than evidence, and his, it screamed. So he walked in, dressed in gold-drenched threats and cigar-scented confidence. He thought this was a chessboard, but he forgot. You don't play. You rearrange the table, set it on fire, and make kings beg for pawns to return. So what did he do? He swung. Resources, reputations, rumors, everything. He had files forged, friends flipped, and witnesses invented. He didn't come for your neck. He came for your identity. Because if he could just rewrite the legend before it was born, maybe he'd never have to face it. But here's the part that makes his hands tremble behind those diamond rings. You didn't respond. Not with threats, not with noise. You just existed differently. You let the lies circulate like secondhand smoke in a closed room. You watched his kingdom try to label you, and then fall apart trying to agree on a name. You let the empire crack itself from the inside out, not with explosions, but with your unbearable lack of reaction, because nothing destroys a tyrant faster than someone who won't kneel or flinch. You didn't need an army. You became an infection in conversations, in meetings, in nightmares. You showed up in the most violent way possible, as a question they couldn't answer, a myth they couldn't kill, because every time they tried to bury you deeper, someone new started asking who you were. And worse, why the king seemed to fear you so much. The crown that once weighed heavy on his head, now it hangs like a noose, not because of a war, but because you made irrelevance look contagious. His men. They started glancing twice when he entered a room. They stopped asking, "What's next?" and started whispering, "Who is he hiding from?" Because nothing ruins fear-based loyalty faster than watching the god of your world flinch at shadows. And pray they don't have your outline. They tried to reframe your defiance as delusion. They tried to label you unhinged. But the problem with men like him is this: they forget the world was built by the unhinged, by those who weren't afraid to break things others worshipped. And when you shattered his reputation, not with a weapon, but with your refusal to play his game, he didn't know whether to retaliate or retreat. So he did both. Loud threats, followed by quiet disappearances. He became a phantom with PR advisors. And still, you didn't chase. That's what really broke him. You didn't sprint for revenge. You didn't call him out. You didn't stand on some podium screaming your version. You just kept moving. And that kind of discipline, it's not just terrifying, it's revolutionary. Because now, every step you take is a referendum on his failure. He wanted spectacle, but you became consequence. Unlabeled, unclaimed, untraceable. The kind of ghost that walks through marble hallways and makes mirrors fog without breath. And the funny part? His men used to chant his name like gospel. Now they're typing your initials into encrypted group chats at 3 a.m., whispering, "I think it's him." So where is he now? Hiding behind pseudonyms, inventing new faces, wearing borrowed suits like armor. You burned his ego so thoroughly, he doesn't just fear you, he fears becoming seen next to you. Because your presence is a timeline splitter. Every room you enter becomes a before and after. Let them dress it up as strategy. Let them call it repositioning. We both know what it really is, a retreat dressed in velvet. He's not rebranding, he's erasing, hoping the past will forgive him if he paints enough new portraits. But memory doesn't ask permission, and every time your shadow crosses a window pane, he wonders, what version of you is watching this time? Because you didn't just dismantle his control. You made him accountable to his myth. That's the worst kind of punishment for men like him. You didn't take his crown. You made it embarrassing to wear. You made legacy feel like liability. You made loyalty feel like a ticking clock. And now, the ones who once kissed his ring, they're hesitating. They're reviewing their exit strategies, not because you're out for blood, but because they're finally wondering what it cost to buy their silence. You, without speaking, asked the question none of them had the courage to face. What did you sell in yourself to stay loyal to that? The fallout is not explosive, it's surgical, quiet, deliberate, slow enough to be misread until it's irreversible. The deals are drying, the donations are delayed, and his inbox, full of apologies, disguised as scheduling conflicts. Because the empire's collapsing not from sabotage, but from embarrassment. You didn't need to storm the palace. You just became a reality they could no longer ignore. The kind of presence that makes all their illusions itch. You aren't a threat in the traditional sense, you're something worse. You're the proof that none of them were ever in control, just temporarily obeyed. And now they're in limbo, too scared to attack, too ashamed to reconcile, trapped in that middle zone where your name tastes like prophecy and his title sounds like parody. It's not about fear anymore, it's about doubt. And doubt, once it enters a kingdom, never leaves quietly. The men he trusted to clean up his mistakes. They're building side exits. They've seen how you operate, not with armies, but with inconvenient truth. They know you don't broadcast vengeance, you embody it. And that makes you unpredictable, because your next move doesn't need a witness. It only needs a ripple, and the next, the one they'll wish never arrived. It begins the second they dare to ask themselves the one question they buried too. What if he was right? That question was never supposed to echo. It was meant to stay sealed behind loyalty contracts and blood-drenched loyalty oaths. But now, it's crawling like a virus inside their minds, multiplying in every corner of their crumbling confidence. Because if you were right, even once, then all their sacrifices were for a cardboard throne and a plastic god. And that's something even mercenaries can't lie to themselves about forever. The Mafia king didn't just fear your rise, he feared your accuracy. You didn't predict his fall. You triggered it with your presence, with your disinterest. He was ready for war. He was never ready for irrelevance. You didn't demand power. You made it look obsolete. And so he runs, not in the streets, not on planes, not between countries. He runs between identities. He hides behind names that sound similar but lack weight. He masks himself in new symbols, new brands, new charities, all hollow, all duct-taped attempts at rewriting a story that's already bleeding in public. The people who once stood for him now scroll silently when he speaks. They forward your name in encrypted chats. They don't dare say it out loud, but they don't need to. You are the answer no one can say, because to name you is to confess. Confess that the throne is empty, that the man they followed was only tall because everyone else knelt. And the worst part? You didn't even expose him. You made him do it to himself. He used to be feared because he was willing to go too far. Now he's feared because no one knows how much further he'll fall. There's no limit to desperation once a man starts erasing his own reflection. And you? You made that mirror impossible to avoid. Now every room he walks into feels smaller. Every camera flash feels like a fingerprint collector. His legend? Shrinking his power. Rebranded and sold to bidders who've already seen you. He's not protecting a legacy anymore. He's covering up the ashes of it. And the only thing more dangerous than a man with too much power is a man who realizes you made that power look fragile. You didn't meet him with bullets. You met him with psychology, with timing, with an understanding of what he needed to believe about himself. And then you dismantled it, not with facts, but with posture, with precision. You walked past his threats like they were performance art, and he knew, deep in his bones, that you were seeing the one thing his empire depended on no one seeing, that he needed you to respond, and you didn't. You let the silence fester into legend. You let your inaction stretch long enough to turn fear into philosophy. You became a question no one had the answer to, and that made you powerful in a way he couldn't imitate. That's what tore him apart. You weren't louder, you were deeper, you weren't reckless, you were surgical. And now his guards watch the windows, but they're not sure what they're watching for. Because you aren't coming to break the gate. You already walked through the walls of their minds. You already adjusted the gravitational pull in the rooms he speaks in. He says your name like it's a trap door. Everyone leans forward, not to hear him, but to measure how shaken he sounds. And that's what it is now. A daily measurement. How broken is he today? How fake is the smile now? How long until the next strategic departure? They don't call it exile. They call it a brand refresh. But everyone knows he's hiding behind titles, behind symbols, behind people who never knew the real war began the day he lost control of the narrative. And you didn't declare victory. You didn't celebrate. You just kept building. That's what stings them most. You made your existence look like evolution. You didn't take their place. You showed them their place was always temporary. Now the old liegemen, they're quietly folding their cards. Some pretend it's retirement. Others pivot into loyalty to newer visions. But the truth? They're abandoning a ship you set on fire with nothing but your indifference. They were never loyal to the king. They were loyal to the myth he stood on. And now that myth belongs to you. Because every myth needs a shadow. Every story needs a correction. Every empire needs the one it couldn't erase. And you became that. By refusing to kneel, by refusing to beg, by refusing to break. You didn't need a microphone. You became a movement. And they're terrified. Because movements don't die. They multiply. And that's what you are now. Not a person, not a target, not even a symbol. You are momentum. You are what happens when power gets called out by presence alone. And he can't compete with that. So he runs, not physically, but mentally, spiritually, reputationally. He calls in PR teams to scrub your influence, hires ghostwriters to drown out your myth. But every narrative they attempt to paint you with falls apart. Why? Because you refuse to play a character. You just exist. And that alone burns their entire theater to the ground. You are not a revenge. You are a mirror with teeth. And the Mafia king? He sees himself now. Clearly, terrifyingly, naked without the crowd noise. And the reflection he sees is not a ruler. It's a relic of a time before you turned the lights on. That's your power. You didn't raise a sword. You raised awareness, and that killed more fear than bullets ever could. Now his allies feel it. That shift, that cold breeze at the nape of their neck when your name comes up. They fake loyalty, but their eyes dart. They stall when asked to endorse. They feel the weight of a collapsing fiction. Because you didn't come to destroy. You came to show. And once something is seen, it can't be unseen. The question isn't what you'll do next. The question is, how many of them will be brave enough to follow you before the last pillar collapses? You were never asking for followers, but they're coming anyway. Quietly, one by one. Not with flags or songs, but with questions. The kind of questions his empire trained them never to ask. What if he never had power, just leverage? What if fear was always the cheapest currency? What if you were the real blueprint they ignored? And those questions, they're spreading like rot behind their smiles. You don't need to recruit. The Mafia king is doing it for you. With every lie he tells to delay the end. With every twitch in his jaw when your name enters a boardroom. He's teaching them that you're not his enemy, you're his truth. And truth doesn't knock. It enters, uninvited, undeniable, unforgiving. And now his fear has matured. It's not panic anymore. It's acceptance that no matter what mask he wears, no matter what story he funds, no matter what allies he buys, you've already rewritten the ending. But we're not there yet. Not completely. Because there's one final thing, one final collapse they haven't braced for. It won't come from you. It won't come from an outsider. It will come from inside, one of their own, the one who always watched too closely, the one who never quite flinched the way others did, the one who just needed one more reason, and they're about to find it. Because the next betrayal, it's not for power, it's for clarity, and once it happens, once that switch flips, you won't need to move. They'll carry your message themselves, not out of fear, but because you gave them language for the truth they were too afraid to speak. And when that moment arrives, there will be no debate, no rescue, no plan, just the sound of a crown hitting the floor, and a king finally realizing he was never hunted, he was outgrown. That is the cut he never prepared for, the wound that doesn't bleed but keeps breaking. You didn't chase him, you didn't sharpen your knives or write manifestos, you simply moved beyond him, and that was the true annihilation. Because tyrants can survive war, they can rebuild after bloodshed, but they can't survive becoming obsolete. No parade of soldiers, no string of ghost-written biographies, no threat-laced speech can revive a reign the world has quietly decided doesn't matter anymore. He stares into the mirror now, not to see his face, but to search for what's missing. The certainty, the conviction, the weight of being untouchable. It's all gone, replaced by something worse than fear, awareness. That his name, once a hammer, now sounds like background noise. That the very halls he built tremble not from your presence, but from the memory of your arrival. Because once someone like you walks through, nothing feels as real as it used to. And so the palace rots from within. His loyalists still wear the suits, still sit at the tables, still speak the lingo. But it's mimicry now. A forced tradition around an unacknowledged absence. They all know it. The empire didn't collapse with a bang. It expired, quietly, intelligently, like a virus outpaced by evolution. They keep attending meetings that don't matter, signing deals that won't last, and saluting a title no one believes in anymore. You didn't dethrone him. You turned the throne into a punchline. And there's no armor for that. He tried to relight the myth, flashed headlines, created artificial chaos just to look useful again. But even chaos ignores him now. The world has moved on, and at the center of it all stands you. Not loud, not decorated, not demanding, but unshakable. You didn't replace the king. You made the concept of one feel insulting because you represent something he never understood. Authority without theatrics, danger without noise, power without begging to be seen. You became inevitable. And now that inevitability is being whispered in corners he thought he owned, not by rebels, but by the very architects of his rise. They're remembering not the bribes, not the threats, but the feeling they had when they first heard your name, and how everything changed afterward. How the rooms got colder, how the rules got questioned, how the fear started shifting from disappointing him to being recognized by you. And that shift, it's irreversible. You didn't flip the script. You ended the performance. You reminded them what it felt like to mean something again. To not just survive under a crown, but to breathe outside of its shadow. You gave them that one thing his regime never allowed, dignity without permission, and they are starving for it. Slowly, they peel off the layers of borrowed loyalty, not in grand gestures, but in hesitation, in sideways glances, in the way they don't stand up when he enters. Not because they hate him, because he no longer matters enough to fear. He was once a name. Now he's a placeholder. He tells himself he can rebuild, that every empire endures a phase of reinvention. But deep down, he knows. You didn't just dent the structure. You broke the blueprint. You exposed the flaw in the very idea of him, that without spectacle, without manipulation, without leverage, he has nothing left. No gravitas, no gravity. Just a voice in a collapsing room, trying to command attention from people who only hear you. And the irony? You never asked to be seen. You weren't craving light. You weren't plotting exposure. You weren't playing to a crowd. You were just moving, with intention, with weight, with eyes that saw the game and refused to clap. And that refusal, it cracked the illusion deeper than any rebellion ever could. Because you weren't interested in breaking the crown, you simply refused to need it. That refusal echoes. It echoes in cities you've never touched, in corridors you've never walked, in the minds of people who never met you, but feel your presence like gravity in their gut. You became the template, the standard, the unspoken answer to the question, what if we just stopped obeying? And the king. He reads reports now, feeds on surveillance, desperate to find a version of you he can categorize. But you don't fit. You are a shifting constant, a living audit of every lie he built his empire upon, and every failed attempt to predict you, just further proof of his own irrelevance. Because you're not reacting to his world. You're rewriting the rules of engagement entirely. His men still speak in code, but that code is laced with fear, not of your retaliation, but of your indifference. They fear being unnoticed by you more than they ever feared being punished by him. Because attention from you means relevance. It means truth is circling, and truth has become a sharper blade than any bullet ever fired. What began as survival became resistance. What began as resistance became revelation. And what began as revelation has become reckoning, not with blood, but with clarity. And clarity is louder than war. Now they can't sleep, not because you're coming, but because they don't know when you'll stop walking. Because your next step could land anywhere, in any city, behind any door, through any camera lens, and no one knows what that moment will mean. Only that when it arrives, everything shifts. They used to measure strength in kills, in control, in compliance. But you flipped that scale. Now power is measured in questions left unanswered, and you, without lifting a finger, left them all questioning the only thing they thought was untouchable. The story they told themselves about who was in charge. You didn't burn the castle. You made them regret ever building it. And now the only ones left guarding him are the ones too scared to be alone. They don't believe in the king. They fear the vacuum. But the vacuum, it's already filled with your presence, with your pace, with the fact that the old ways no longer hold weight in a world where you exist. And the final fracture? It won't come from a headline. It won't come from an attack. It'll come from a whisper, from the moment someone leans over just before signing that next allegiance and says, "But what if they're watching?" Not because you've claimed dominion, but because you've claimed truth. And truth is its own surveillance. The Mafia king used to rule through fear of what he'd do to you. Now he lives under fear of what you'll reveal in them. And that fear, that internal collapse, that's the masterpiece. You didn't just end an empire. You redefined how power works. You made it unacceptable to submit. You turned obedience into embarrassment. And when the dust settles, not a single monument will carry your face. Not a single banner will fly your name. And still, every soul that walks freely, every oath that is broken, every hierarchy that collapses without a sound, will be your echo, and he'll still be there, watching, waiting, searching for the version of himself that existed before you arrived. But there's no going back, because you didn't walk in as a hero. You didn't ride in as a savior. You weren't trying to destroy. You were simply done pretending. And in a world built on lies, that is enough to end king.